Hello, everyone, and welcome to week one. This week, we're going to take a look at a lot of the models that try to explain and understand addiction, behavioral addictions, and substance addictions, and also help provide some definition. Addiction is really complex, and so there's not just one way to describe and define addiction. So that's why you'll see several models is trying to understand that complexity. If we look at the DSM, it helps us understand kind of the diagnosis perspective and the symptoms involved. And so we will be exploring the DSM diagnosis criteria during this course, and you'll have a chance to try diagnosing some clients you'll be introduced to in this course. But taking a look at the DSM, we see the substance use disorders really fall within a continuum of symptoms, or meaning that a continuum of severity of someone could have a disorder that's not specified. Maybe they've had a few instances or a few consequences related to substance use. However, there's really not much of a pattern yet, anywhere from a mild to moderate severe substance use disorder. And so that lets us know that that it can be progressive. And so these symptoms begin to become more extreme. They kind of add up and start becoming part of different areas of life for someone. And so that's part of the complexity, is this disorder that gets worse over time, that as these symptoms add up, it's labeled as being more of a severe disorder. And so that's something that you'll take a look at. It's really important when you are looking at a perspective of diagnosis that the DSM clearly says that there is a pattern of symptoms. So if someone has one DUI or one argument with a spouse that was related to substances, that alone doesn't really establish a pattern of problematic use. And so it's really important, if we're working and trying to provide an accurate diagnosis, that we do get that information that establishes a pattern for these symptoms to be presenting as a disorder. So that's part of what we'll begin to look at in terms of etiology and really understanding addiction. One of the reasons we see a lot of differences too is because we do have some people who can start using a substance or begin engaging in addictive behavior, yet at some point they really realize this just isn't, part of what I don't want to progress this any further. They can easily change without making drastic changes in their life, and those behaviors don't get out of control. You might have another person who starts using or starts in these behaviors in a similar way, yet their use progresses into a severe disorder. And so again, why we have different etiologies and trying to understand that. And a lot of the research really helps us understand the changes in the brain that occur with the addictive disorders. And so to kind of simplify that a little bit, though, our field really looks at the effects on the brain and the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex, to break it down into understanding the behavior of clients we may be working with who are dealing with this disorder or their family members. And so that limbic system really is that area of the brain that is about survival and drive. And so substance use affects this area of the brain. This area of the brain also has memory and emotion regulation. And so if substance use is affecting that area, one of the things that begins to happen is the substance itself is mimicked as a need for survival. And so it kind of gets looped in that survival system, similar to what happens with trauma, that area is affected. And so cravings become this innate or this drive for survival rather than just a need or a desire to use the substance. And so that's one of the things we're really trying to understand with our field, is that it's not about choice or morality. When you get to that place of a more severe disorder, um, that's when we begin to see the brain has organically changed significantly to a place where the limbic system is overriding the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is really responsible for helping us with executive decision making, kind of pulling information related to something that happened in the past to kind of bring it into the future and kind of weigh those consequences. You know, last time that wasn't the greatest decision. Well, again, when the limbic system takes charge, then it overrides the prefrontal cortex and inhibits the ability of a person to be able to do that in the moment. And so looking at those brain changes is why we term addiction as a brain disease, because at that point, the disorder has significantly altered the structure and the functioning of the brain. But that is a certain percentage of the people who we might be treating in a mental health agency. That's kind of those clusters of symptoms that are more in that severe range. And often we will see those symptoms and that level of severity with individuals who have co-occurring disorders or some other brain vulnerabilities, such as trauma and different things that may have led to the brain being a little more vulnerable to excelling that disorder. So that's a simplified version of trying to understand kind of the complexity of what we term addiction. Now, for those individuals who haven't quite reached that level of severity, we look at different interventions, because it's going to be a very different approach to how we help someone who really substance use is beginning to be a problem, but it hasn't gotten to that place where it's uncontrollable and unmanageable. So you'll be introduced to some of the models and the etiology, and just keep that in mind, that when we're looking at these different ones, there's a difference between addiction and substance use disorders that are milder. Similar with behavioral addiction, we look at different models to help us explain some similar behavior that we find even in substance use disorders, repetitive behavior that does begin to affect an individual's life. But there are different models we need to look at to try to help understand and explain those behaviors. So enjoy learning more about that this week. I encourage you to take a look at week 8. You have a major assignment due in week 8. That assignment is 2 parts. One is a PowerPoint presentation in which you will work with a client, not actually, but if you had that client in your office, this is the way you would break down how you would explain several different things to that client. And one of the components of that is helping explain etiology, based on this person's symptoms, what's going on with them. How do you break that down in a way that they understand? So begin working on that. I encourage you to do that so it doesn't sneak up on you in the last week. So I will be back with you for week 2 to take our next topic.